Welcome back to Movies Outpost. Today we'll be diving into an action crime thriller movie titled Assault on Wall Street. This story showcases what happens when you tell someone that has nothing left to lose, that the rich will get richer and the poor will stay poorer. A vigilante is created and you can see the rest for yourself. The movie kicks off at the height of the financial crisis. A portfolio manager named Jeremy Stancroft strictly instructs his staff to prioritize company profits without much concern for their clients, including a huge amount of pension fund investors. Despite knowing the risks for the clients and the potential consequences, the staff is left with no choice but to do as instructed and unload a list of products. Meanwhile, Jim is with his wife, Rosie, at the hospital. Looking through her test reports, the doctor lets the couple know that there's a recurrence of her symptoms even though the tumor has been completely taken care of. Prescribing weekly hormone injections in addition to a treatment for diabetes, he even suggests an experimental trial for faster results. Agreeing to everything, Jim and Rosie then get to the billing section where they are informed of their exhausted insurance limit. Using his credit card to pay for now, Jim later realizes that there is nothing he can do to keep including Rosie's treatment within the insurance. Worrying about their future gets Rosie emotional that night before Jim assures her that they will be just fine. The next morning, during his work as a driver at an armored car service, Jim decides to call his investment broker, Robert, to ask about the status of his invested pension fund that he earned by serving in the military previously. Unable to get much information, he is asked to call back later before joining his colleague Sean and two of their NYPD buddies Freddie and Frank for lunch. After hearing about his friends losing 20% of their pension due to wrong investments, the discussion then steers to how the people on Wall Street are actually the biggest thieves. Later that night, Jim is trying to look through his bank accounts and financial portfolio to get an idea of where they stand. When Rosie reminds him of her treatment the next day, regarding its payment, he says that they will have to use their credit card for the moment despite its recently increased interest rates. In addition to paying for the hormone injection, his credit card pays for the medicines as well, further adding to Jim's liability. Moreover, he meets Robert later only to learn that the investment of his pension fund might have gone bad. Pending investigation, Jim faces having lost all his money only because it was invested in real estate and other similar places without adequate due diligence. Meanwhile, Stancroft isn't doing too well either, as the financial crisis keeps pulling prices down. Returning home late from work one night, Jim learns that the bank had left a message regarding their mortgage and has asked him to call the next day. Promising Rosie that he will take care of all of it, Jim is then given a letter from his broker's firm. Checking it a while later, Jim realizes that he was now expected to pay $60,000 more to cover the expenses and losses of his initial investment. Frustrated out of his mind, Jim threatens to sue Robert, who only tries to placate him by saying that an investigation will clarify things. Determined not to just sit around waiting for the investigation to conclude, Jim calls Sean to cover for him over the next couple of days. The next morning he meets a lawyer, Mr. Patterson, who agrees to help him avoid having to pay the extra amount and any interest that accumulates over it, but demands a $10,000 retainer to file his complaint. A glimmer of hope always comes with a price after all. Sean offers to loan him the amount of the retainer, and insists on helping him this way even when Jim initially seems reluctant. Considering Sean's offer, Jim then heads over to the bank only to learn that the flexible interest rate on his home's mortgage means that his monthly premium has pretty much doubled now. Unwilling to sell the house in a crashing economy and no refinancing option from the bank means that Jim's financial crunch is a bit too real now, considering Rosie hasn't been working for almost a year. Lying when he meets her at the hospital later for her hormone shot, Jim assures her that there isn't anything to worry about. Taking up Sean's offer, Jim deposits the retainer amount to Mr. Patterson, who mentions filing a collective lawsuit with other similar investors to make a serious impact. Regarding the payment of $60,000, the lawyer asks if Jim would be willing to forget his original investment if this additional payment was written off. He says that this would be the faster and more efficient way of getting the target off his back, since it could take a much longer time for the market to get back to its earlier levels and his investments to give him any kind of actual returns. Jim says that he has already lined up a meeting with the assistant DA. However, a scheduling conflict results in Jim not being able to meet him despite waiting for a long time. Jim's only respite comes in the form of Sean saying that he doesn't need to be paid back for the money he lent. Frustration at the entire situation continues to build for Jim even as Rosie's treatment and medicines keep adding up as well. It isn't just Jim being stressed out by the bills, but even Rosie is bothered because of her inability to share the burden to help her husband. Continuing to be troubled after a fortnight, she cancels the appointment for her treatment one day since their credit card was declined the last time, plus they've been getting relentless phone calls from the bank as well. Facing the fact that they were well and truly broke, she gives Jim the most recent letter sent by the bank. Revealed to be the beginning of foreclosure activity on their property, the letter informs him about receiving an eviction notice soon in case payments aren't regularized and brought up to date. Jim immediately calls Mr. Patterson about the foreclosure letter and asks about the option to waive his investment. Sly Mr. Patterson replies that Jim didn't make the choice until it was too late, and hence that isn't an option anymore. Additionally, the firm Jim invested with has now become bankrupt with their assets purchased by another company, which is why they cannot even file a complaint anymore. The only advice Mr. Patterson has for Jim now is to pay the $60,000, which he obviously does not have. Rosie can do nothing but blame herself and her sickness for collecting this debt. Needing a distraction, Jim goes to work and meets his boss Andy. More bad news follows as Andy tells him about being contacted by some lawyers and collection agencies regarding Jim's debt, adding that they had a lien on his monthly wages that left him with about $800. Andy then lets Jim know about letting him go, as they cannot trust employees with financial troubles to do their job of protecting money. Handing over $9,000 in cash for his loyalty and all his back pay and overtime, Jim leaves his workplace, ignoring Sean on his way out. While Jim is on his way back home, a thoroughly emotional Rosie writes down everything she desires on a note. Sean leaves an apologetic message for Jim that evening when he gets home to the shock of having lost his wife. He holds on to her ring as she asked him to in her note all through the police investigation. And once they leave, Jim is a man who has lost everything and is truly alone in the world. Thoroughly devastated, Jim grieves his loss and continues to ignore Sean, Freddie and Frank, who regularly call to leave a message asking about his well-being and making futile plans to meet. He slips into a dark and monotonous life on his own until things change one evening. Walking on his way back home, Jim spots the assistant DA he was unable to meet earlier at the local pub and waits to speak to him. Mentioning all the messages he has left for him that have gone unanswered, Jim tells him about having lost everything, including his life savings, his home and his wife. The assistant DA does not seem very keen to participate in this conversation and tries to leave, only to be blocked by Jim, who slightly pushes him, and he unfortunately ends up in the path of a passing cab. Jim then immediately makes a run for it. The next morning's paper announces the death of the assistant DA as a drunken accident. Elsewhere, Stancroft is finally relieved that their company has dropped everything that could paint a bad picture for the bank. Although it means that their clients certainly lost a ton of money, Stancroft is a happy man. With time, meanwhile, fueled by seeking vengeance for his dead wife, Jim puts together all the information about several Wall Street financiers and lands on Stancroft as his main target. On the other hand, having completely stopped answering the phone, Jim is eventually handed an eviction notice with 48 hours to vacate his home. Refusing to sign the notice, Jim puts his plan of revenge into action instead. He gathers all his research along with his firearm and leaves his house to check into a local hotel. Having lunch with Freddie and Frank, Sean gives Jim a call just then, which he surprisingly decides to answer, and informs his friends about needing more time before he can join them for lunch again like before. Heading out a while later, he meets an arms dealer to purchase firearms and grenades, citing personal security as his reason. Over the next few days, he meticulously goes over building plans of Stancroft's office, including the nearby areas, and even takes the time to practice his aim. Executing the first phase of his plan one morning, he shoots the vice president of his brokerage firm in the basement of his office building. With the police finding no suspects, the case is treated as a targeted shooting for the guy's involvement in the financial crisis. While for Jim, it is only just the tip of the iceberg. He doesn't stop there and instead plots escape routes, studies the distances of his various targets from police stations, and builds on his plan of taking down the thieves of Wall Street. Proving the ruthlessness of a man who has lost everything, Jim is relentless in his precision of finishing the people whom he believes to be his foes for being indirectly responsible for the life he is left with. Rattled by the rampant killings, Stancroft asks for personal security for himself one day while Jim finally meets his friends, who are truly happy to see him back. He tells them of his plan to move to a different city or state altogether for a fresh start, and ever so casually mentions that the recent shootings across Wall Street are also a great reason to leave the city behind. When Freddie and Frank speak of the pressure they are facing at work to catch the culprit, Jim confesses to him being responsible. However, everyone shrugs it off as a joke before getting on with their lunch. Later, under the disguise of a janitorial staff, Jim gets to Stancroft's office. Keeping up his act, he cleans a few bins while carefully scoping the place out for the next few days. One such afternoon, he spots Robert around the building, only to learn that he has found a new job and even makes plans to discuss a new investment soon. On the other hand, Jim continues preparing for his final showdown until one night when he finally takes down all his research yet again, now with just Stancroft as his remaining target. Calling Robert about needing advice for investing his apparent poker winnings, Jim then makes plans to meet him at the coffee shop near his office early the next morning. Before leaving the hotel the next day, Jim destroys all the incriminating evidence of his research and heads over to the parking building across from Robert's office to wait for him. Spotting him in the crowd below a while later, Jim precisely shoots him and then proceeds to take down several others in the windows of the building who may have spotted him amidst the commotion. Unsatisfied, he pockets the grenades, grabs his mask, and then sets his weapon on fire before going across to Stancroft's building. With everyone distracted by the disaster outside, Jim's masked self pays no heed as he finds his way to the elevator. Getting to the office, he pulls his gun on one of the fund managers who tells him about his pregnant wife. When the staff notices Jim there and calls security, he lets the fund manager go for the sake of his wife and then proceeds to shoot randomly at the rest of the employees. He also rolls his grenades towards the groups that try to hide and then ruthlessly shoots at the ones that remain. After everyone is taken down, Jim takes the stairs to go up a floor towards his target. Meanwhile, SWAT arrives on location and makes their way up the elevator to the massacred floor. Getting to Stancroft's floor, Jim is shot in the arm on sight by Stancroft's security, but he takes him down before scaring the assistants out of his cabin. Locking the door behind him, Jim gets Stancroft to sit across his desk while he makes himself comfortable in his chair and removes his mask. With his gun trained on Stancroft, Jim questions him about his corrupt ways. Stancroft attempts to justify his actions by stating that even historically there isn't a truly honest rich person, and adds that most of them are hailed as the nation's heroes. While he continues his tale of the rich persistently staying rich and the poor staying poor, Jim spots the security camera of the SWAT having reached the floor below. When Stancroft mentions that the capitalist society ensures the survival of the fittest, Jim suggests a competition between them and offers him his gun, with the winner getting to live. Meanwhile, the SWAT arrives on their floor just when Stancroft grabs the gun and shoots at Jim, only to realize that it has no bullets. The SWAT team simultaneously bursts through the door and shoots Stancroft as their target. Jim is then safely escorted to the lobby as they believed Stancroft was the mastermind. The medics then tend to Jim's wound and he later meets Frank there, who leads him outside the building where he sees him off with Freddy. Walking to his freedom, Jim vows to continue being a soldier of the people through his vigilante justice when the legal system fails to do its job. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this video, a like and subscribe always comes a long way. Catch you on the next one.